Hey, Book Dragons, I'm so glad you're here with me today. We're going to be talking about one of my new favorite vampire tales, The Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff. And I'm going to break this video down into a few different sections. The first section will just be basic plot structure, and then the second section will be talking about the world building, and we will talk about some of the characters that are important to the story as well, because they are kind of intricately woven into that world building. And then at the end, I'll talk about some reasons why you may want to read this series and some reasons why you may not want to read this series as well. Kind of give you some information to hopefully help you make a decision whether or not it's worth trying for you. And then at the end of the video, at the very end, I am going to have a spoiler section, okay? So I will let you know when that is so that you can bow out, but the majority of this video is going to be mostly spoiler-free, okay? So if you want any snacks or drinks, make sure to grab those now, and we're going to get right into the basics. What is The Empire of the Vampire by Jay Kristoff? I have called it an epic vampire fantasy saga because it has so many hallmarks of epic fantasy, the way the world building is done, the way the story is written. It is very much reminiscent of epic fantasy, but with vampires. And it is set in a Gothic medieval type setting, and it also has a deeply religious setting as well. And the majority of the book is written in a frame story with an interview, very similar to Interview with the Vampire, even though I have not read that book, but I have seen the movie. I kind of know how that all plays out. It's very much a similar thing. The main character, Gabriel de Leon, is being interviewed by his vampire captors, and he's telling his story of how he slew the Forever King. And so we'll get into more details of that, but the majority of the story is being told from Gabriel's point of view, as well as one other person, and I'm not going to spoil who that is. You'll just have to read for yourself, okay? So that's the basics of the story. Now I want to get into more of the plot development, the world building, the characters, and those really are all woven together in such a way that you can't have the story without any of those. And so I'm just going to get right down to it. The vampires in this world are very structured. What I mean by that is that there are different types of vampires, different heads of vampire families, and so I'm just going to give you a little bit about what that looks like. First of all, we have the high bloods, or the true-blooded, and they are either the original vampires in this world or direct descendants of the original vampires. So those are the dominant, the most powerful vampires, the most beautiful vampires. They are incredibly formidable, and they are linked to specific bloodlines. And then you have the cold bloods, or that is the derogatory term that is usually used to refer to them. They don't like to be referred to that way. They prefer to be called the mediae as opposed to the priori, which are the high bloods. And then you've got the mediae, which are what Gabriel not so lovingly refers to as cold bloods. And these would be the blood scions of the high bloods. So these were the first vampire converts, if you will, that the high bloods turned. And most of them serve the high bloods in one form or another. Then you have foul bloods. Now this is where it gets really interesting, because the foul bloods are like zombies, but they're vampire zombies. These are people who were turned, but their bodies were not quite as quickly susceptible, and so by the time they turned into vampires, their brains were mush. And so they are able to be controlled by high bloods and cold bloods, but they really have no will of their own. If left to run rampant, they will eat anything and everything, just like zombies would. They're often also called the wretched, and they're more or less used as cannon fodder by the high bloods and cold bloods. All right, and then you have the pale bloods. And this is also something very unique that Jay Kristoff has done, because the pale bloods are half human, half vampire. They are scions of a vampire and a human. And in this story, Gabriel de Leon is one of those pale bloods. They do inherit blood gifts from their sires, but to a lesser extent. And they also have cravings, not to the same extent as vampires do, but they do have blood cravings, and many of them, like Gabriel, reduce that down to a powder and smoke it through a pipe. Many of the pale bloods are scions of the ancient or the most ancient vampires, and some are even scions of the priori. And then the final category in the different tiers would be the thralls, and these are not vampires, but they are humans who have been fed little by little on the blood of the vampires they serve, and so they are destined to be at the whim of the vampires and to do their bidding. And the vampires do exert a certain level of control over them. So it's a very interesting way that Jay Kristoff has designed his vampire classes. It almost felt like a role-playing game, like Dungeons and Dragons, but all focused on the different types of vampires and different abilities that they have and different classes that they come from. And there are 5 ancient vampire houses. The progenitors of these houses are the original priori, the original 5 vampires that killed the Redeemer. And the Redeemer is the person that the religious orders in this world have faith in. But the original 5 vampires are the ones that killed the Redeemer, and they are the ones that are the progenitors of these different vampire houses. So we'll talk a little bit here about them. First, we have the Voss family. And Fabian Voss is known as the Forever King, and he is one of the original 5 vampires in this world. And the Voss family is known to have telepathic abilities, enhanced endurance, and they are almost completely invulnerable to being killed. And then we have the Blood Chastain, as they are known. And when this story starts, they do still have their original priori, and that would be Margot Chastain. And they are able to communicate with animals and shapeshift into different animals like wolves. So if you think back to Dracula, he was able to turn into a bat, but also into a wolf, take different forms. And that is the essence of what the Blood Chastain can do. And then you have the Blood Devok, and they possess super strength, and they are able to control people's minds. And they do not have their original priori. Then there is the Blood Illion, and they excel at emotional manipulation. So they are the emotional vampires. Even though they are actual vampires, they do bite people, but they can also control people's emotions. And then there is one final line, commonly known as the Ilie or the Asani, and they are a religious vampire cult that is bent on their mission to restore the sun. But they may have different motivations for restoring the sun than Gabriel and his friends do. And so I think this is a good time to talk about what has actually happened in this world. And that is that an event has taken place known as Day's Death. A permanent eclipse happened to the sun, and that is why we have an empire of vampires. Because the sun no longer hurts them to the extent it did, and they have run rampant and taken over the world. And that's not a spoiler, because that is literally where everything in this story starts. That is what this story depends on. That is the focal point. And there are people who are on a mission to restore the sun to its power. Most of those people belong to the Order of Silver Saints. And the Silver Saints are pale bloods who have been more or less rejected by their sires because of one thing or another, because, vampires just go off and sire anybody with anyone. And so, they're kind of outcasts, but they're also outcasts of society. And so they take a vow of chastity. They're very much like monks, but they are warrior monks. And they are determined to kill vampires, to destroy the Forever King, and to restore the power of the sun. And so, of course, Gabriel de Leon is the focal point of this story. He is our main character, and he is a brash and daring, oftentimes reckless man who is determined to do things his own way when the Order of Silver Saints does not satisfy him in their methods. And as the story progresses, Gabriel comes along different friends who are going to help him in the mission, because there are others that want to see the sun restored as well. And one of those is a dust dancer known as Phoebe Adunser, and she is from a different part of the country that is very like Scotland in its language, the way they dress and things like that. So that was really interesting to see her portrayed in that way. But she becomes one of Gabriel's friends, and we also meet a young teenager named Dior, who has a very important part to play in the restoration of the sun. But that's all I'm going to say. I don't want to spoil that at all for you. And Gabriel is also helped by many of his fellow brothers of the Order of Silver Saints along the way. And the religious orders in this world are very reminiscent of Catholicism or Byzantine Christianity, but they are very, very different as well. And I will leave you to explore those differences. But I really loved how deeply Jay Kristoff designed his world. It's so detailed, it's so well fleshed out, and it's also really well paced. The story does not really let up. You're on the edge of your seat a lot of the time, but you also get some quiet moments of reflection and learning more about the characters and their backgrounds and their deepest desires. But that doesn't affect the progression of the story and of the plot, and I thought that was excellently done. And I also loved the way the morality of the church and other religious orders in this world was questioned by different characters in the story, and how they looked past so many of the things that were said to be heretical or against the faith, and they looked deeper into the heart of who a person is and did not judge them on their choices, even though they were brought up in religious orders that would say otherwise. So you do have characters that would be on the LGBTQ spectrum in this world, and they are treated so appropriately and loved for who they are by the people that are closest to them, even though they had been rejected by different religious orders for the choices of who they love. But ultimately, this story portrayed it in such a way that we're left to understand that you love who you love, and that doesn't matter, despite what religion will tell you. I really liked that theme that was portrayed in the story. And there were other themes as well that I really loved. Themes around courage and following your heart. And there were so many times where grief was a serious theme in the book because of characters that would die that other characters were close to. And so there was a lot of grief dealt with as well. And it just served to flesh out the characters in such a great way. I just absolutely loved it. So let's talk about some pros and some cons, why you may want to read it and why you may not want to read it, okay? I think the biggest pros are the world building, the character development. If you like immersing yourself in deep, passionately designed characters, you're going to feel right at home here. The world building is incredibly immersive. You are going to feel like you are in this world, just waiting for the next thing to happen. You're going to feel like you are in Gabriel's shoes, because a lot of the story you are in his shoes. And it just feels so real and authentic, and it doesn't feel like a fictional world. At least it didn't to me. I loved the expansion of vampire tropes and the different orders of vampires and different families and classes. The way it was executed throughout the story just made sense. If somebody was being attacked by vampires that were reading their minds, they knew they were dealing with the Voss, and so on and so forth. It just felt like everything fit. There are some cons that you may want to look out for, though. These were not cons for me, but they may be cons for you. There is a lot of sex in the book. I'm just going to say that right up front. There is a lot of sex. Detailed sex scenes. And it can be pretty hardcore at times. So I just want to put that out there right up front. If that is not your thing, you may want to either read the series and try to skip over those, or maybe this series isn't for you. It didn't bother me, but it may bother you. So keep that in mind. Also, some people do not like Gabriel because he's a bit of an edgelord. He is a unique character, and sometimes he just says things that are like, wow, you really said that, Gabriel. Okay, all right. He definitely lives on the edge. He likes shock value. He likes to shock people with what he says. So keep that in mind as well. That may be a con for you. It wasn't for me. It didn't bother me. I like characters like that, but it may bother some people. And then the other thing I would just throw out there is that the ending, it's not necessarily the ending you are expecting. I don't want to say too much, but just be prepared that you may be expecting one thing to happen, and most of the story will lead you to expecting that to happen. But then it doesn't quite happen the way you thought it would, and some things that the story has told you may not be entirely true. Okay, so there is an element of the unreliable narrator in this book. So if you don't like unreliable narrators, maybe this book isn't for you. But I liked it. I liked it a lot. So I would say if you are good with the cons and you really like the pros and you like some of the details that I've given you about the world and how immersive it is, I really think you should check this series out. It is phenomenal. Kept me on my seat the entire time. I could not put it down. I was so excited when each new book came out. It was a day one read for me. As soon as I started the series, I'm like, okay, where's the next book? I'm on it. I'm going to read it day one. And I had a blast. It was so much fun. But do keep in mind the cons. And if some of those really bother you, maybe it's not for you. And that's okay. No book series is for everyone. So that is the end of my mostly spoiler-free review, okay? If you don't want spoilers, stop the video now. I am so glad you have joined me here. Thank you very much. And now we're going to talk spoilers. Okay, are you guys ready? So I think the biggest spoiler here really is the ending. That ending I had to sit with for weeks because, as I said earlier, it wasn't the ending I was expecting. The more I sat with it, the more I really am okay with how it ended. The reason for that being, it was like a family reunion. It really was. All the characters that I thought had died didn't really die. And there are some that would say, oh, that really cheapens their sacrifice. And I get that. It kind of does. You know, Jay Kristoff ripped our hearts out with all of the different people dying. You know, we thought Phoebe was dead. We thought Dior was dead. We thought there was just no hope left. And then all of a sudden it turns out to be a big hoax on Gabriel's part to worm his way into the heart of the vampire coven and destroy them from the inside. I get the frustration that some people have with the ending, and I get why it cheapens the deaths of those characters and cheapens their sacrifice to just say, oh, it never happened. But I liked it because I had fallen in love with all of these characters throughout the story, and when they died, I was absolutely crushed. I was just mortified that had happened, and oh man, I tell you what, I was so happy to see them come back. And everybody got mostly happy endings, and I was just really, really excited to see that. And they figured out how to restore the sun. That was fantastic. I loved every minute of being in that story. And for it to end the way it did was weird at first, but it made sense. I think it was really clever on Gabriel's part to construct all that and to appear to have the intense emotions that he did as if one of them had actually died. And it was just very cleverly done. And I don't know about you guys, but I have to be honest, I did not see it coming until he actually told us. And then I'm looking back over the story and I'm like, oh, he suckered me too. It was clever. That was a really clever twist. Bravo, Jay Kristoff, for pulling that off. This book just makes me want to read more Jay Kristoff because I really like his writing. I like the way he pulls off a story. I don't know if his older stories are like that, but I'm very curious now. I want to read Nevernight. That's probably going to be my next series that he does. Yeah, it was great, guys. And I have so many favorite characters. It's hard to pick just one. Dior was great. Phoebe was amazing. I really, really liked Fabian Voss. I really did. Even though he was the enemy, he's one of those enemies that you love to hate. He was so perfectly written. I can't stop gushing about this series. So that's all I've got to say, really. I think that was the only spoiler I wanted to talk about was the ending. There were so many emotional beats in that story, and I think it made sense the way he wrote it. So anyway, that's all I've got to say. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the series. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the ending. I would like to know if you saw it coming before it actually came, and if you figured it out, or if you were as blown back as I was by it. I would love to talk with you about this series, and I think I'm going to end it there. Thank you so much for staying here through all of this, and I hope you will tune in next time. Until then, make sure you read more books.